Why are you two so unhappy? Isn't it good to enter the palace? Ning Xiangyuan blinked and looked at Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan and asked, Ha ha ha, ha ha ha. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan sneered tacitly and walked into the college, leaving Ning Xiangyuan standing there with a confused look. What did they mean? Were they too happy? Their expressions were too. After a whole day of classes, Jingyu was listless. On the other hand, the others all looked as if they had been injected with stimulants. Mother Yun smiled and praised everyone. Everyone wanted to perform well at the banquet 3 days later. Chapter 62. She naturally put in a lot of effort into her studies. TSK. You're really hard-working. Jingyu sat on a stone chair with her legs crossed. She held a teacup in one hand and a snack in the other. She looked at the original resting time and saw that everyone was still diligently practicing etiquette. Boring. Shangguan Linglan yawned and supported his head with his hand, looking drowsy. Jingyu, help me see if this is the right way to walk? Ning Xiangyuan pulled Jingyu to the stone path and asked Jingyu to watch her walk. Oh. Jingyu didn't even put down the teacup and snacks in her hands. She leaned against the tree trunk and watched Ning Xiangyuan carefully walk with small, quick steps. Your hands are wrong. Jingyu took a sip of tea and said faintly, Don't lower your head. If you take big steps, hand. Jingyu corrected Ning Xiangyuan's mistake. Inexplicably, a playful thought arose in her heart. Training people turned out to be so interesting. She grinned and trained with more vigor. Aya, I'm so tired. Ning Xiangyuan supported her sore body and sat on the stone chair. Her face was full of grievance. Am I so stupid? I can't even learn such simple things. Ning Xiangyuan's eyes turned red as she spoke. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan looked at each other. Yuan, think about the two of us. You'll think that you're amazing. Jingyu couldn't find any words to comfort her. She rolled her eyes and pointed at herself and Shangguan Linglan. Ning Xiangyuan was slightly stunned. She looked at Jingyu and then at Shangguan Linglan. She suddenly laughed and said, How can you say that about yourself? Seriously. Ning Xiangyuan glared at Jingyu coquettishly and said, Yuan, why do you care so much about going to the palace? Jingyu asked as she took a sip of tea. It's an honor to be able to enter the imperial palace. If you can gain the recognition of the imperial concubine, it will make father's official career smoother. Ning Xiangyuan crossed her arms and lowered her eyes. I'm different from you. If I don't have the ability, I'll be used as a tool for marriage. Jingyu's heart trembled slightly. Looking at Ning Xiangyuan's lowered head, she suddenly understood. What happened to your father? Shangguan Linglan frowned slightly. He looked at Ning Xiangyuan and said, If you need my help, just tell me. Lan, you can't help me. Ning Xiangyuan bit her lip and shook her head. Taking a deep breath, she smiled and said, Let's continue training. Yeah. Can you help me look again? Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan looked at each other and saw the helplessness in each other's eyes. They lowered their eyes and stood up to train with Ning Xiangyuan. Laughter could be heard, dispelling some of the helplessness. In these 3 days, everyone worked even harder. Other than Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan, almost everyone was very passionate about this. In the prince's residence, 3 days had passed. The academy specially allowed students not to go to school. All the students were to wait at the entrance of the academy before entering the palace together. This morning, Jingyu was dragged out of bed by Yin Xiao. Yin Xiao said that she needed to wash up properly. She couldn't lose her dignity when entering the palace. Jingyu suddenly thought of the last time she entered the palace with Xiao Chun. She instantly felt uncomfortable. Yin Xiao, if you dare to put all those gold on my head, I'll chop you up. Early in the morning, Jingyu hugged a pillow and stared covetously at the box of gold hairpins in Yin Xiao's hands. Chapter 63. Imperial Concubine, you are going to the Imperial Palace. These 24 golden hairpins were specially prepared for you by the 9th Emperors. Yin Xiao looked helplessly at Jingyu, who looked as if she was about to face a great enemy. I don't care. If you want to wear it, let Xiao Chun wear it himself. I won't wear it. A certain woman scolded angrily. In the end, under Jingyu's desperate resistance, Yin Xiao had no choice but to put away the hairpins. After persuading Jingyu for a long time, she finally put on 2 more golden hairpins. However, in Jingyu's opinion, this was her bottom line. Sigh. Jingyu sighed along the way. Going to the Imperial Palace, she didn't even get enough sleep. It was really annoying. The 9th Imperial concubine has arrived. The voice of the guard driving the carriage came from outside. Jingyu lazily yawned and stepped out of the carriage. So lively. Jingyu looked at the dazzling lineup of people in front of her and instantly widened her eyes. Many of the young ladies were wearing their most gorgeous clothes. The bright and eye-catching colors and exquisite makeup were simply comparable to a beauty contest. This degree of eye candy is really not for show. Jingyu clicked her tongue and sighed. She turned her head and saw Shangguan Linglan and Ning Xiangyuan walking over hand in hand. Yeah, why are you dressed so simply? Ning Xiangyuan frowned and looked at Jingyu with dissatisfaction. This. Jingyu looked at her light purple exquisite palace dress and didn't feel that it was simple at all. Why aren't you wearing any jewelry? Ning Xiangyuan pulled up Jingyu's hand and sized it up. Instantly, her frown deepened. She looked at Jingyu seriously and asked, Did the 9th Emperors not buy you any jewelry? No, I just don't like it. Jingyu was slightly embarrassed. Mother Yun is here. Let's go. Shangguan Linglan was dressed in a simple dark blue outfit without any accessories. The two of them looked at each other helplessly and then looked at the carriage that came with Mother Yun. Led by Mother Yun, they got into their own carriages and headed for the gate of the Imperial Palace. Finally, they got out of the carriage at the gate of the Imperial Palace. After Mother Yun handed the invitation card to them, they were let in. Jingyu blinked and looked at this series of complicated things, frowning slightly. Why wasn't it so troublesome the last time she entered the palace? Author. Nonsense. Don't you know what kind of person the 9 emperors are? Who dared to stop him? Were they courting death? Jingyu and her entourage walked through the palace gates and headed towards the Happy Spring Garden where the imperial consort resided. The moment Jingyu entered the palace gates, she was stupefied. She looked around as if she was looking for something. Jingyu, what are you looking at? Shangguan Linglan grabbed Jingyu's hand and asked with a frown. I'm looking for carriages. Do we have to walk there? Jingyu blinked and looked at Shangguan Linglan. Are you stupid? How can there be carriages? We have to walk there ourselves. Shangguan Linglan looked at Jingyu indifferently and said, What? Jingyu was instantly stunned. She looked at the wide road that stretched for an unknown distance and wanted to cry but had no tears. It's such a long road. How long can you walk? It's simply asking for my life. Jingyu was stunned. She lowered her head and walked with the entourage. However, the really terrible thing had yet to come. She didn't know if the road to the Happy Spring Garden was the main road, but there were countless carriages. The carriages of concubines, princes, and princesses kept appearing. Jingyu knelt down until she felt that her knees were no longer hers. Chapter 64. Is there an end to this? Jingyu lay on the cement ground, feeling dizzy. It's the second prince's carriage. Kneel down. Mother Yun looked at the carriage that was slowly approaching, waved her hand to signal the crowd to move aside, and knelt down to show respect. Jingyu's eyes widened when she heard Mother Yun's words. Xiao Jingran's carriage? Jingyu's eyes widened, and she immediately lowered her head, praying in her heart that he didn't want to see her, Xiao Jingran's car slowly drove over. Jingyu didn't dare to move because he didn't show any intention of stopping. She watched the car pass by her from the corner of her eyes, and her eyes immediately lit up with surprise. Great, he was almost there. Get up. Mother Yun's voice came. Jingyu paused, lowered her head, and then stood up. Xiao Jingran's carriage also passed by. Jingyu slowly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she wasn't discovered. She had offended Xiao Jingran as soon as they met. If she was discovered, Jingyu suddenly shivered. Stop the carriage. Just as Jingyu was letting her imagination run wild, Xiao Jingran, who had already walked far away, suddenly raised his hand and shouted for the car to stop. This shout frightened Jingyu, and she hurriedly lowered her head as low as she could. Meanwhile, the young ladies beside Jingyu were all so excited that their cheeks were flushed. He didn't want to see her. Jingyu lowered her head and murmured over and over again, "The future ninth imperial concubine, we meet again," until a playful, cold, and murderous voice sounded above Jingyu's head. All of Jingyu's fantasies and concealment were shattered. Jingyu wanted to cry but had no tears. "Look at yourself. Why did you provoke such a thing for no reason?" "Ha ha ha, long time no see, second prince." Jingyu silently took a small step back and looked at Xiao Jingran with a smile. "Why aren't you kneeling when you see this, prince? Looks like all the etiquette lessons you've been learning have been for nothing?" Xiao Jingran narrowed his phoenix eyes and sneered at Jingyu. "You're right. I didn't forget about the greeting." Jingyu blinked and looked at Xiao Jingran seriously. "You." Xiao Jingran was enraged. He flung his sleeves and stared at Jingyu. "With your looks, do you think you're fit to be the ninth imperial concubine? If this gets out, people will laugh their heads off." "Eh, Xiao Jingran, why are your teeth still intact?" Jingyu remained unmoved as she blinked at Xiao Jingran in confusion. Xiao Jingran was slightly stunned. Seeing how stubborn Jingyu was, his expression changed unpredictably. "Jingyu, how dare you call this prince by his name?" Xiao Jingran glared angrily at Jingyu as he spoke. "Isn't a name used to be called? Why else would you give it a name?" Jingyu shrugged nonchalantly. "You." The anger in Xiao Jingran's chest soared. He wanted to slap the woman in front of him to death. She had provoked him time and time again. Letting her die like this would be letting her off too easily. He should use her to torture her. As Xiao Jingran thought about it, the anger in his heart dissipated. He calmly looked at the gazes of the people around him and sneered, "It's rare for me to meet you. This prince will be merciful and send you off." "What?" Jingyu was stunned. She didn't know what Xiao Jingran was talking about. "Men, please invite the future ninth imperial concubine onto the carriage." Xiao Jingran waved his hand and pointed at a small board behind the carriage. "Please invite the future ninth imperial concubine to sit there." Chapter 65. Jingyu pursed her lips as she looked at the small wooden plank. 2 legs wouldn't even be enough for her to stand on, right? She still wanted to sit? "Please." The 2 guards stood on each side and stared coldly at Jingyu. Their hands were on the swords at their waists, giving off a threatening aura. Jingyu wanted to cry. She didn't do anything. How could they treat her like this? Where was the justice? "Fine, let's go. I'm not afraid of you." Jingyu snorted coldly and walked over to the carriage. She carefully climbed up the carriage and stepped on the wooden plank with 1 foot. She instantly felt as though she was floating. "Damn, this wooden plank isn't sturdy enough?" Xiao Jingran looked at Jingyu's horrified expression and a joyful smile appeared in his eyes. He walked briskly up the carriage and lay down inside. He was in a good mood as he calmly said, "Let's go. We're rushing to the Imperial Consort's place. We can't be slow." "Yes." The guard driving the carriage respectfully replied, "I'm leaving first." Jingyu raised her hand to bid farewell to Shangguan Linglan and the crowd of dumbfounded people. Unexpectedly, the carriage suddenly sped up, scaring Jingyu so much that she lost her balance and almost fell off. "Xiao Jingran, why are you leaving so quickly? Are you rushing to reincarnate?" Jingyu angrily scolded. However, the moment Jingyu finished speaking, the carriage actually sped up. Jingyu screamed continuously and Xiao Jingran, who was inside the carriage, sighed in satisfaction. He was in a good mood with a smile on his face. If the 9th Emperors knew that his woman was being treated like this, how would he feel? Xiao Jingran suddenly felt a burst of joy from his heart as he thought of this. They walked all the way to Ichuan Garden. At the beginning, Jingyu would still scream, but in the end, there was no sound at all. Xiao Jingran thought that she must have been scared silly and didn't dare to speak. Thinking of this, the smile in his eyes deepened. "That's the second prince's carriage, right?" "Yes." "Who's that woman?" "I don't know." "How dare you? Why are you lying on top of the car?" "That's right. The second prince didn't do anything about it either. Could it be that he acquiesced to it?" "It's possible." Xiao Jingran was sleeping well when he suddenly heard the discussion of the palace maids and eunuchs. He frowned slightly. What did he just hear? Where is a woman? Lying on top of the car? Or did he acquiesce to it? "Stop the car." Xiao Jingran's face suddenly turned cold and he shouted, "Ouch!" Jingyu blinked her eyes in confusion. She rubbed the demon that was knocked over and sat up, asking, "Why did you suddenly stop? Have we arrived?" Xiao Jingran strode down the car and saw Jingyu sitting on the roof of the car, blinking and looking at him. "You damned woman! Who allowed you to get on the roof of the car?" Xiao Jingran's face was dark. Could it be that Jingyu had been riding on his head all this time? Thinking of this, Xiao Jingran's face looked as disgusted as if he had eaten a fly. "You didn't say that I couldn't get on." Jingyu shrugged and said indifferently, "This prince orders you to get down immediately." Xiao Jingran was furious. He glared at Jingyu as if he wanted to skin her alive. "I'm not getting down. If you let me sit on top of the car, I'll get down. Otherwise, I'm going to stay here." Jingyu shamelessly sat on top of the car with a "What can you do to me" look. "You." Xiao Jingran's face turned angry. He pointed at a guard and said, "Go up and get her down for this, prince." Chapter 66. If any of you dare to touch me, I'll scream molestation. Jingyu glared at them and looked as if she would rip off her clothes if anyone touched her. The guards immediately widened their eyes and didn't dare to step forward. Jingyu was the woman of the 9 emperors. They didn't have the guts to touch her. Are you a woman or not?" Xiao Jingran was completely helpless. He looked at Jingyu and his face was as black as ink. "It's none of your business whether I'm a woman or not. I'm going to sit in the carriage anyway." Jingyu rolled her eyes and said seriously. Xiao Jingran turned his head and looked around. He couldn't imagine what it would be like for Jingyu to sit on the roof of the carriage and walk into the harem. He rubbed his aching eyebrows and said, "I told you to sit in the carriage. You better get down." "I don't believe you. Swear to the heavens that you're not lying to me." Jingyu rolled her eyes and looked at Xiao Jingran. "Jingyu, don't push your luck." Xiao Jingran's face turned cold as he glared at Jingyu and said, "I'm just afraid that you'll go back on your words." Jingyu spread her hands and looked as if she didn't believe Xiao Jingran. Xiao Jingran gritted his teeth. He was a prince, but his credibility was being doubted. This was an insult to him, but he had to swear. "Okay." Xiao Jingran tried hard to suppress the murderous intent in his heart and said, Xiao Jingran, swear to the heavens that I won't make things difficult for Jingyu. Let her sit in the carriage and send her to Ichuan Garden. Will that do?" "Yes. It seems like there's no problem." Jingyu nodded and slowly climbed down from the roof of the carriage. She stood in front of Xiao Jingran and looked at him with a smile. "You're not as scary as I thought you were." "What?" Xiao Jingran was stunned. Before he could ask, he saw Jingyu climb into her car with a look of surprise. She said in surprise, "It's so comfortable here. The roof of the car is so uncomfortable." Xiao Jingran stood where he was, and the corners of his mouth twitched. He felt that his head was particularly painful today. He bent over and entered the car. The moment he saw Jingyu sprawled on the soft couch, his face turned cold again. "Can't you just sit properly? There's so much space here. You sit and I'll lie down." Xiao Jingran urged her a few times every now and then. Finally, he sent Jingyu to Ichuan Garden where Imperial Consort Nyang was at as fast as he could. He couldn't wait to throw Jingyu down the stairs, but who would have thought that Jingyu would refuse to go down? "Are you going to get off or not?" Xiao Jingran glared fiercely at Jingyu, who was hugging the couch tightly. "I'm not going down." Jingyu also glared back at Xiao Jingran. The two of them were in a deadlock. Xiao Jingran wanted to rush over and pry Jingyu's hands off. Who on earth did he invite to get on the carriage? How could she be so arrogant? "I don't want to be alone with that woman. She's too scary." Jingyu looked at Xiao Jingran with tears in her eyes and said, "I'll go down after Mother Yun and the others arrive." "Please." Xiao Jingran stared at Jingyu and sighed helplessly. "Are you afraid of Imperial Consort Nyang?" Xiao Jingran's expression changed slightly as he looked at Jingyu and asked, "Afraid?" Jingyu shook her head and sat up. She frowned and said, "I just feel that it's too tiring to deal with this kind of woman. Alas, my life is so hard. Why did I enter the palace for no reason?" Chapter 67. Ahem. Xiao Jingran had a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. Seeing Jingyu sigh, He raised his eyebrows and did not speak. Why do you think there is a tea party? It's just a tea party. Why do you have to pay so much attention to it? I can almost foresee how popular it will be later. Jingyu leaned against the wall of the carriage and muttered with a frown, Why do you say that? Xiao Jingran raised his eyebrows and asked, Eh? Jingyu blinked and was about to explain when she suddenly heard the exclamation outside the carriage. She immediately lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked out. Sure enough, she saw that Mother Yun had come with a group of people. Her eyes immediately showed a look of surprise. I'm leaving first. Let's talk next time. Jingyu did not linger at all. She climbed out of the carriage and turned around to smile at Xiao Jingran. Thank you. Xiao Jingran looked in shock at Jingyu's cheerful running away. A strange feeling flashed through his eyes. He slightly pursed his lips and raised his voice to drive the carriage away. Looking at the messy bed, a trace of a smile flashed through his eyes. Perhaps even Xiao Jingran himself did not notice this smile. Jingyu followed Mother Yun and the others into Ichuan Garden. The scenery in the garden was particularly pleasing to the eye. Jingyu looked at the scenery with wide eyes and exclaimed in her heart. Jingyu had never seen these rare plants in her 2 lives. After walking for a short while, she saw Fu Ruoqing sitting in a high position in a gorgeous palace dress. She was the imperial noble consort and was greatly favored by the emperor, but he had not made her the empress. The empress was weak and had no children, but the emperor had not abolished her and made her the empress. However, the reason for this was unknown. Sit down. Fu Ruoqing was indeed a beauty in the making. Her seductive eyes seemed to be silently inviting you. However, if you looked closely at her eyes, you would see that they were calm and unwavering. There was a hint of unfathomable profoundness in them. Jingyu didn't want to be noticed by the imperial consort, so she found a seat at the end of the row and sat down. She lowered her head silently, as if she was invisible. Today, this consort has called everyone here for 2 reasons. The first reason is that the palace has offered a new batch of flower tea. The taste is quite good, so this consort has brought this tea out for everyone to try. The second reason is naturally to see how well everyone has learned the rules and etiquette of the palace. Fu Ruoqing slowly smoothed out the creases on her sleeves as she spoke. Thank you, imperial concubine, for your grace. Everyone bowed and said, Someone, serve the tea. Fu Ruoqing raised her hand slightly. Her nails, which were painted with cardamom, were exceptionally attractive. A group of maids served the flower tea. The extremely beautiful color stunned everyone who saw it. Who's going to pour tea for me? A maid wanted to pour tea for Fu Ruoqing, but Fu Ruoqing raised her hand to stop her. She raised her eyes slightly and swept her gaze over the crowd below her. The moment Fu Ruoqing finished speaking, everyone's eyes lit up with joy. All of them sat up straight, hoping to be called by the imperial consort. Jingyu, come serve this consort this tea. Jingyu was still trying to figure out what flower this flower tea was. Just as she was about to ask Ning Xiangyuan, she didn't expect that Fu Ruoqing would suddenly mention it. Me. Jingyu pointed at the tip of her nose. When she looked up, she saw Fu Ruoqing looking straight at her with a gentle smile. Jingyu felt helpless. She was already hiding behind her, so why was she still biting onto her and not letting go? Chapter 68. Come, since you are the 9th Emperor's imperial concubine, it is only right for me to guide you. Fu Ruoqing looked at Jingyu with a smile and said, Let me see how the 9th Emperors judge people. Jingyu gritted her teeth, but she had no choice but to walk up to the high seat and kneel beside Fu Ruoqing. She thought about how to pour tea that Mother Yun had taught her and carefully took the teapot with a serious face. But when she touched the teapot, she found that the teapot burned her hand. Jingyu suddenly pulled her hand back and looked up at Fu Ruoqing. What? Am I not worthy to drink the tea you pour? Fu Ruoqing looked at Jingyu with a faint smile. The cold mockery in her eyes made Jingyu grit her teeth. I don't dare. Jingyu lowered her head and took a deep breath. She raised her hand to take the teapot and endured the burning heat. She poured a cup of tea for Fu Ruoqing with trembling hands. But because her hands were shaking so much, the tea spilled on the table. It spilled. Pour it again. Fu Ruoqing looked at the spilled tea and said indifferently, The maidservant standing by her side did not blink and poured the tea that Jingyu had just poured onto the ground. She carefully wiped the table dry and looked like she wanted Jingyu to pour it again. Jingyu looked up at Fu Ruoqing's face. A cold light flashed through her eyes, but she quickly looked away and the cold smile on her lips deepened. Yes, I will pour it again. Jingyu's lips curved up and her smile made Fu Ruoqing frown. This woman was indeed a ruthless person to be able to smile in such a situation. Jingyu raised her hand to pick up the hot teapot again. The iron teapot was painted with colorful patterns. From afar, it looked no different from ordinary porcelain, but it was easy to feel when holding it in her hand. No wonder it was so hot. Jingyu poured another cup of tea for Fu Ruoqing and tried to steady her hands to prevent the tea from spilling. But when she took back the teapot, a drop of tea still spilled. Fu Ruoqing slowly moved the cup away from the side and smiled at Jingyu, saying, "It spilled again." Jingyu lowered her head. "It seems that you didn't learn well in school. Continue pouring." Fu Ruoqing had a proper smile and lightly touched the table. She looked at Jingyu and said this with a smile. Seeing this, the people below finally understood. How was she guiding Jingyu? She was clearly making things difficult for her. Usually, Jingyu poured tea quite well. Why was her hand trembling in front of Imperial Consort Nangyang? Could it be that she was nervous? Shangguan Linglan narrowed his eyes and looked at the movements of the seats of honor. He didn't believe that Jingyu would be nervous in front of the Imperial Consort. Jingyu strangely quieted down. Fu Ruoqing calmly waited for Jingyu to make a move, but Jingyu didn't move for a long time. She slightly frowned and said, "This consort told you to pour tea. Didn't you hear?" Jingyu chuckled when she heard this. She raised her hand to pick up the teapot and slowly stood up. She looked down at the seated Fu Ruoqing with a brilliant smile and said, "I'll pour tea for Imperial Consort right now." Tea. Jingyu directly poured the tea in her hand onto Fu Ruoqing's face as she spoke. Ah! The scalding hot tea spread from Fu Ruoqing's forehead to her cheeks. In an instant, a large patch of her beautiful face was scalded red. "Imperial Consort, does this tea taste good?" Jingyu tightly held onto the scalding hot teapot. She looked at Fu Ruoqing with a pair of cold eyes and said, "Do you need me to directly feed you?" Chapter 69. Ah! It's so hot. Ah! Fu Ruoqing never thought that Jingyu would dare to treat her like this. She immediately fell to the ground from the hot tea. She covered her painful face in horror and screamed, "My face! My face! Ah!" The maid beside her was also frightened by Jingyu's appearance. She looked at Jingyu in horror and said angrily, "Impudent! Impudent?" Jingyu sneered and threw the teapot in her hand onto the table. She looked at Fu Ruoqing and her maid and said, "Didn't the Imperial Consort want me to serve tea? I did it, and even gave it to her personally." Everyone below was stunned. They stood up and looked at Jingyu in disbelief. They then looked at the Imperial Consort who was covering her face and felt a chill run down their backs. Imperial Physician. Summon the Imperial Physician. Capture this person who dares to offend the Imperial Consort. Jingyu raised her hand and waved the guards away. She arrogantly raised her chin and said, "I can walk on my own." After saying that, he glanced at Fu Ruoqing with a cold smile. Then, he turned around and left in a natural and unrestrained manner. There was not a trace of fear or uneasiness in his heart. The news of the Imperial Consort's disfigurement at the tea party spread through the entire palace in an instant. When they heard that Jingyu had splashed her face with hot water, everyone was stunned. In an instant, everyone knew of Jingyu's name. They also knew that Jingyu was actually the 9th imperial concubine chosen by the 9 emperors. That woman's face was disfigured. In the palace where the Empress of Phoenix Palace lived, a woman with a pale complexion heard the maid's report. She immediately sat up in shock and looked at the maid in disbelief. "Yes, I heard that her entire face was scalded." The maid couldn't help but smile as she looked at the woman. "Ha ha ha. Retribution. Retribution." The woman laughed as she stood up. She was the current empress, Fei Yaju. She had the empty shell of an empress without any real power or favor. "Your Highness, you should really go and take a look at Imperial Concubine Fu's current appearance." This ninth imperial concubine is truly formidable. She actually dared to splash boiling water all over Imperial Concubine Fu's face in front of all the young misses of the official families, causing Imperial Concubine Fu to be disfigured. That palace maid had been by Fei Yaju's side since she was young, and her name was Yun Xiu. The ninth Imperial Concubine? Fei Yaju's lips curled into a faint smile. Yes, I think her name is Jingyu. She's already been sent to the punishment hall to be interrogated. I don't know if she'll be able to keep her life, Yun Xiu said as she looked at Fei Yaju. Humph, that slut Fu Ruoqing wants her to die? This consort won't agree. Help this consort get dressed. This consort wants to visit noble consort Fu at Jin's palace. Fei Yaju's lips curled into a cold smile. Fu Ruoqing, whatever you want to do, this consort is going to go against you. Jingyu was currently squatting in a dark cell. Her head was lowered, and her hands were trembling slightly. The waves of pain caused Jingyu to frown deeply. She raised her hands to look at her blistered palms, and a cold smile appeared on her lips. If a tiger didn't show its might, did they really think she was Hello Kitty? Jingyu sat on the floor as her stomach rumbled. She hadn't eaten lunch yet, so she was really hungry. Jingyu was currently thinking about all sorts of delicious food when she suddenly heard the sound of the prison door's chains. She blinked her starving eyes and looked over to see a black figure walking over to Jingyu with heavy footsteps. Xiaochun, I'm really hungry. Jingyu raised her small head to look at that familiar face and pouted as she spoke. Chapter 70. Xiaochun's current mood could only be described as violent rage. The exquisitely dressed woman before he left the house was now sitting on the dirty ground in a sorry state. She looked up at him with an aggrieved expression. She was so petite and pitiful. They actually dared to treat Jingyu like this. Let's go home and eat. Xiaochun slowly squatted down and extended his hand towards Jingyu. Okay. Jingyu smiled like a flower when she heard this. She looked at Xiaochun's outstretched hand and didn't put her hand on it. Instead, she threw herself into Xiaochun's embrace and wrapped her arms around Xiaochun's neck. She said in a muffled voice, I want to hug you. I don't have the strength to walk. Okay. Xiaochun's body suddenly froze when he heard the muffled voice in his ear. His face darkened, and he gently lifted Jingyu up. The guard outside the disciplinary hall saw Xiaochun carry Jingyu out, and his eyes widened. He thought for a moment and stepped forward. He bowed and said, Ninth Emperors, the imperial concubine has ordered that she cannot be released. She has hurt the imperial concubine's face. Scram. Xiaochun looked at the guard in front of him and coldly spat out a word filled with killing intent. The guard was so frightened that his face turned pale, and he hurriedly retreated to the side. Jingyu turned her head and looked at the guard who had been scared out of his wits. She narrowed her eyes and said indifferently, Xiaochun, did I cause trouble for you? Yes, you did cause trouble. Xiaochun nodded gloomily. He looked down at Jingyu in his arms and said, Next time, don't make me come to the palace to pick you up. It's too troublesome. Huh. Jingyu was slightly stunned. She raised her eyes to look at Xiaochun's cold and expressionless face. Suddenly, a strange feeling flashed through her heart. It was as if in this strange world, her originally impetuous heart had suddenly found a safe haven to rely on. It was just a simple sentence, but he indulged her. Why? Jingyu looked at Xiaochun in confusion. She didn't understand why Xiaochun would treat her so differently. They hadn't known each other for long. Jingyu never believed in the so-called love at first sight. She was also not narcissistic enough to think that the high and mighty Xiaochun would suddenly take a fancy to a wild girl in her teens. Xiaochun, go find Imperial Consort Nyang. Jingyu suddenly spoke. Xiaochun, who had just stepped out of the punishment hall, paused. He frowned and looked at Jingyu in confusion, as if asking what was wrong. Although you don't find it troublesome, I still feel uncomfortable if you don't make things clear. Let's go find the imperial concubine. Jingyu looked up at Xiaochun and said calmly, and Xiaochun and Jingyu looked at each other and confirmed that she wanted to go of her own accord and not for any other reason. After making a sound of agreement, he carried Jingyu onto the carriage and headed for Jin's palace. On the way, Jingyu was held in Xiaochun's arms and didn't let go. Jingyu also didn't let go of the hand around Xiao Qin's neck as they headed for Jin's palace. When they arrived at Jin's palace, they found that it was already filled with people. The emperor, empress, and all the important concubines were present. When Jingyu and Xiao Qin arrived, there wasn't much of a reaction. Presumably, when Xiao Qin took Jingyu out, someone had already reported it. Xiao Qin, you better give Jin an explanation. The emperor was clearly very angry. Jingyu stood in a sorry state in front of the crowd. Everyone looked at Jingyu's standing figure with measuring eyes. Chapter 71. Your Majesty, let me explain. Jingyu raised her eyes and looked at Emperor Xiaoyi indifferently. Her neither servile nor overbearing manner made everyone's eyes light up. Explain? What's there to explain? Just as Jingyu was about to speak, the curtains in the inner room were pulled open. Fu Ruoqing had already changed her clothes. The large robe made Fu Ruoqing look especially petite and pitiful. Even with the veil on her face, it couldn't hide the small red burn mark on her forehead. Emperor, she offended this concubine and ruined this concubine's appearance. Shouldn't this kind of crime be punished? Fu Ruoqing's eyes were filled with tears. Her weak appearance while being supported by a maid made Jingyu feel pity for her. Imperial concubine Yang Yang, do you think I would splash water on your face for no reason? Jingyu coldly smiled as she looked at Fu Ruoqing and said, You used the excuse of guidance to make things difficult for me and I endured it, but you didn't give up and kept making things difficult for me. Do you want me to continue enduring? I'm sorry, even a clay figurine has a temper, not to mention a living person like me. Jingyu coldly smiled as she looked at Fu Ruoqing. Emperor, this concubine has been wronged. Fu Ruoqing's eyes were filled with tears as she bowed in front of Emperor Xiaoyi and said, The 9th imperial concubine didn't understand etiquette, and this concubine gave her guidance in hopes of correcting it. Who knew that after saying a few words, the 9th imperial concubine flew into a rage out of humiliation and splashed your hot tea on this concubine's face. Jingyu, is there such a thing? Xiao Ye's face sunk as he coldly stared at Jingyu. Emperor, why don't you ask imperial concubine Yang Yang what happened to the teapot first? Jingyu coldly smiled as she stared at Fu Ruoqing. Teapot? What happened to the teapot? Xiaoyi frowned as he looked at Fu Ruoqing and asked. Qinxia doesn't know. Fu Ruoqing looked up at Xiaoyi and said, Humph. Imperial concubine Yang Yang said that she was instructing me, but she secretly ordered someone to bring me an iron teapot to make tea. She also wanted me to pour good tea and hold the teapot firmly so that the tea wouldn't spill out. Imperial concubine Yang Yang, you're really good at instructing me. Jingyu sneered at Fu Ruoqing, who was playing dumb. What? Xiao Ye's face darkened as he looked at Fu Ruoqing. The burn on my hand is right here. You'll know if I'm lying or not. Jingyu opened her right hand indifferently. The burns on her small hand were much more serious than Fu Ruoqing's face. Some of the white blisters had already burst. How painful was that? Fu Ruoqing. Xiaoyi was clearly frightened by the burn, and he turned to look at Fu Ruoqing angrily. What? An iron teapot? Your Majesty, this concubine clearly used a porcelain pot. Fu Ruoqing looked at Jingyu's hand in shock. Her expression was confused and shocked as she looked at Xiaoyi and quickly said this. Then what's with the burn on Jingyu's hand? Did she do it herself? Xiaoyi waved away Fu Ruoqing's hand that was grabbing his clothes and said angrily, It must have been a mistake. It must have been a palace maid who didn't pay attention. This concubine really doesn't know anything. Fu Ruoqing lowered her head and looked like she was about to cry. Call that palace maid over. Xiaoyi waved his hand with a sullen expression. Jingyu lowered her head and slowly put down her hand. Xiao Qin, who was standing next to her, had a very low aura at this moment. If it wasn't for Jingyu stopping him from speaking, he would have already ignored this group of people and left with Jingyu. It was her fault for hiding her hand behind his neck. Chapter 72. So it was because she didn't want him to see it. This woman. This servant knows her mistake. Please spare my life, Your Majesty. The palace maid trembled as she was brought in front of the emperor. She suddenly knelt on the ground and cried out. It was this servant's fault for being careless and taking the wrong teapot. These two teapots look exactly the same, and this servant didn't know which one was the wrong one. Trash. You can't even take the wrong teapot. Someone come, drag her out, and give her 50 beatings. Xiao Yi angrily roared as he choked on his breath. This concubine only wanted the best for Jingyu. But she treated me like this concubine. Fu Ruoqing wiped away the tears in her eyes as she spoke in a trembling voice. I don't believe that those palace maids who brought the teapot didn't notice it. If it wasn't for Imperial concubine Gui's tacit approval, how could they not say anything? Jingyu coldly laughed as she spoke. You. A trace of anger flashed in Fu Ruoqing's eyes. Ku. At this time, the long-absent Empress Fei Yaju suddenly coughed twice. Her face was pale, and she looked very weak. She pursed her lips as she looked at everyone and said, Your Majesty, in this concubine's opinion, let's just forget about this matter. Forget about it? How can we forget about it? Fu Ruoqing was instantly dissatisfied. She stared at Xiao Yi and said, Your Majesty, this concubine's face is already like this. How can you, Imperial concubine Gui? Your face is your face, but this king's imperial concubine's hand is not a hand? Xiao Chun couldn't bear it any longer as he walked over to Jing Yu's side and coldly looked at Fu Ruoqing as he spoke. Fu Ruoqing's face paled. Seeing how Xiao Chun was protecting Jing Yu, her hands slowly clenched into fists. Why was she only injured her hand? But Xiao Chun was protecting her like this. She couldn't accept this. From beginning to end, he didn't even look at her, not to mention greeting her. His words were meant to protect her. Imperial concubine Fu, you didn't teach your servants well. When the 9th Imperial concubine's hand is injured, she accidentally splashed water on your face. You can't blame her. Moreover, the Imperial physician said that your injury is not serious. Look at Jing Yu's injury, it is much more serious than yours. Fei Yaju faintly narrowed her eyes as she spoke. Her gentle and calm words helped Jing Yu clear of all the blame with a single sentence. It was clearly her. Fu Ruoqing still wanted to speak, but Xiao Yi raised his hand in annoyance and interrupted Fu Ruoqing's words. As the Empress said, let's leave it at that. Xiao Yi stood up and glanced at Fu Ruoqing indifferently. Without saying a word, he flicked his sleeves and left. Fu Ruoqing was stunned to see Xiao Yi, who had always obeyed her, leave her behind and leave. Her eyes filled with unwillingness, and she clenched her fists tightly. Xiao Chun raised his hand and pulled Jing Yu's hand. Looking at her scalded hand, his expression turned cold. It hurts. Jing Yu saw that Xiao Chun was about to touch it and quickly spoke up. Her small face was filled with pity. Xiao Jingran, who was standing next to Xiao Chun, saw Jing Yu's appearance and his expression changed slightly. He turned to look at Fu Ruoqing with a faint cold light in his eyes. Let's go. Xiao Chun lowered his eyes and let go of Jing Yu's hand. He picked her up in his arms and walked out of the hall. Jing Yu nestled in Xiao Chun's arms and didn't say anything. She raised her head slightly and looked at Fu Ruoqing, who was kneeling on the ground and watching Xiao Chun leave in disbelief. If Xiao Ye's actions just now made Fu Ruoqing feel unreconciled. Chapter 73. But now, Xiao Chen's actions made Fu Ruoqing unable to believe it. The 9th emperors, who had never been close to women, actually carried Jing Yu out of the palace in front of so many people. This kind of action was a huge blow to Fu Ruoqing. She had grown up with Xiao Chun, and Xiao Chun had never been so attentive to her. The only time they had ever touched was when they held hands. Such intimate contact was actually with someone else. This kind of action made Fu Ruoqing's heart burn with jealousy and anger. Jingyu, Jingyu, I definitely won't let you off. Xiao Jingran watched as Xiao Chun carried Jingyu out, and a trace of astonishment flashed through his eyes. Xiao Chun was actually so attentive to Jingyu. This kind of thought made Xiao Jingran's heart feel strange. It seemed like there was another way to deal with Xiao Chun. Or perhaps, Xiao Chun finally had a weakness? Xiao Jingran pursed his lips and his eyes turned cold. It seemed like he had to send more people to pay attention to Jingyu to ensure that he could deal a fatal blow to Xiao Chun. Following Xiao Chen's departure, Xiao Jingran and the other concubines also found an excuse to leave. Before Empress Fei Yaju left, she slowly stood in front of Fu Ruoqing and said indifferently, Imperial Consort Fu, your face. It seems like it won't recover for a while. The ridicule in her words caused Fu Ruoqing, who was on the verge of exploding, to immediately turn ferocious. She threw herself at Fei Yaju without any hesitation and shouted, "I'll kill you!" Fei Yaju screamed and was instantly pushed to the ground by Fu Ruoqing. Her delicate neck was viciously choked by Fu Ruoqing. The maids beside her were so frightened that their faces turned pale. They hurriedly went up to pull the two apart. This terrifying matter reached Emperor Xiao Ye's ears. Fu Ruoqing was grounded for an entire month, and the Empress used this as an excuse to keep the Emperor in her palace. Jingyu was slightly shocked when she heard Yin Xiao's words. She didn't think that Fu Ruoqing would be so impulsive. However, she was even more delighted in her misfortune. Fu Ruoqing was grounded. Didn't this mean that she had a month to properly exercise her bones and muscles? Ow, ow, ow. Jingyu watched as Xiao Chun removed the gauze in his hand and changed the dressing. She instantly made a big fuss. Why didn't you yell when you were scalded? Xiao Chun narrowed his eyes and looked at Jingyu. He frowned fiercely, looked at Jingyu's frightening wound. And, what should I yell when you're not here? Jingyu looked at the wound on her hand and blinked her eyes as she spoke casually. She completely didn't care how dependent her words sounded. Xiao Chen's hand that was holding the medicine suddenly paused. He looked up at Jingyu. What's wrong? Jingyu saw that Xiao Chen wasn't applying the medicine for her and blinked her eyes in confusion. It's nothing. Xiao Chen lowered his eyes and carefully changed the dressing for Jingyu. If Xing Yi and the others saw his gentle manner, their eyeballs would probably fall to the ground in shock. When did our cold-blooded master become so gentle? It's done. Xiao Chun let go of Jingyu and nodded in satisfaction as he looked at his bandaged hand. Jingyu was slightly stunned. She raised her hand that had been bandaged countless times by Xiao Chen, and her face instantly darkened. Wasn't it just scalded? Was there a need to wrap it up like a pig's trotter? How was she going to eat like this? It was also because of this that Jingyu had been living like a pig for the past few days. Chapter 74. Xiao Chun, I want to drink water. Xiao Chun, I want to eat grapes. Xiao Chun, I'm hungry. Xiao Chun. Xing Yi and Xing Er stood outside the study with black lines on their faces. Hearing the ordering voice inside, they felt their entire being in a mess. They almost didn't dare to imagine their master working like a cow or a horse for the imperial concubine. In order to serve Jingyu more conveniently, Xiao Chen actually let Jingyu into the study that no one else was allowed to enter. AI, so comfortable. Jingyu raised her hand that was wrapped beyond recognition and suddenly felt very satisfied. Looking at Xiao Chen's hardworking appearance, her mood was beautiful. Jingyu. Just as Jingyu was immersed in herself, Xiao Chen suddenly raised his head from a pile of documents and called out to Jingyu. And Jingyu responded with a smile. The Princess Royal sent an invitation to invite you to the Princess Royal's residence to participate in the poetry banquet. Xiao Chun picked up a red card from the table and handed it to Jingyu as he said calmly, "Don't worry." What? Jingyu suddenly widened her eyes and sat up. She took the invitation with her left hand and looked at it. What poetry banquet at the Princess Royal's residence? What the hell was a poetry banquet? Why was she invited? Jingyu suddenly wanted to cry but had no tears. She blinked and looked at Xiao Chen pitifully and said, "I'm an injured person. Can I not go?" "No," Xiao Chun said faintly and raised his eyebrows. "You are the future 9th imperial concubine. The Princess Royal personally sent an invitation to see you because of the etiquette of meeting the 9th imperial concubine. This concerns the face of the residence. You have to go." Xiao Chun narrowed his eyes as he spoke. "How about we discuss it again?" Jingyu asked carefully. "No," Xiao Chun said firmly. Jingyu wailed and lay on the soft couch, shouting, "I'm not marrying." Jingyu. Xiao Chen's expression suddenly changed. He forcefully pressed down on Jingyu's shoulders. The anger brewing in his eyes made Jingyu tremble beautifully. She looked pitifully at Xiao Chen and said, "I'm just joking, okay?" "No." Xiao Chen narrowed his eyes at Jingyu and said, "The next time you dare to say something like this king will cut your tongue out." "No." Jingyu suddenly screamed and quickly covered her mouth. She looked at Xiao Chen in horror. The Princess Royal has treated me very well since I was young. I want you to see her this time because I want her to be a witness. Jingyu is my woman." Xiao Chen slowly released his hand from Jingyu and stood up. He looked at the scenery outside the window and spoke faintly. Jingyu was slightly stunned. She looked at Xiao Chen's back and slowly lowered her head. "Okay, I know," Jingyu said in a muffled voice. She turned around and rolled to the inner side of the soft bed. Xiao Chen turned his head and looked at the cute Jingyu. The corners of his mouth curved slightly. He walked over and slowly bent down. He gently planted a kiss on Jingyu's cheek. "Tomorrow afternoon, I'll send someone to send you over." Xiao Chen touched Jingyu's little ear and said, "Okay." Jingyu's body stiffened, and she responded in a muffled voice. She felt Xiao Chen's breath slowly leave her body. She let out a sigh of relief. She raised her hand and touched her ear. She found that it was frighteningly hot. Her cheeks blushed slightly, and she buried her entire face in the blanket. The next day, when Jingyu changed the dressing, she found that the wound didn't hurt as much as it did 2 days ago. She blinked slightly and looked at Xiao Chen in surprise. "What medicine is this? It feels so powerful." Chapter 75. I remember that the first time you helped me apply medicine, you disliked this medicine? Xiao Chen's hand that was holding the medicine paused as he looked at Jingyu from the corner of his eyes. Did I? Ha ha ha. I definitely didn't. You remembered wrongly. Jingyu laughed awkwardly and waved her hand. Her averted eyes were filled with guilt. Xiao Chen took the gauze and wrapped his wound properly. He didn't say anything else. Jingyu sat in the carriage and arrived at the legendary Princess Royal's residence. Yin Xiao helped Jingyu off the carriage. When they stepped into the dazzling Princess Royal's residence, they were informed by the steward that the Princess Royal had gone to a manor in the back mountains. Jingyu had no choice but to ask the coachman to take a detour. It was said that the Princess Royal loved horseback archery. Her Princess Royal residence was located far away with its back facing a mountain. The back of the mountain was encircled with a hunting ground. Beside the hunting ground was an incomparably exquisite garden. This time, the tea party would be held in this garden. When Jingyu finally arrived, the manor was already bustling with noise and laughter. When they heard the announcement, everyone stopped talking and looked at Jingyu, who was leisurely walking in from the entrance of the manor. Their eyes were filled with curiosity. Jingyu's actions in the palace had long been known by these nobles. Today, they could finally see Jingyu's true face. Naturally, they couldn't help but size her up. Jingyu's body stiffened the moment she stepped into the manor. She walked to the front of the legendary Princess Royal under the gaze of dozens of pairs of eyes. The woman sitting on the high seat, dressed in luxurious clothes, looked to be in her 20s, but she was actually close to 40 years old. Because of the exquisite makeup on her face, she didn't look old at all. The person sitting beside her was the eldest princess's daughter, Princess Xiang. "Greetings to your highness, Princess Royal." Jingyu bowed and curtsied. Her jerky appearance showed that she didn't bow often. However, her posture was correct. "You must be Jingyu?" The eldest princess's name was Xiao Peibai. She was the emperor's eldest sister and also Xiao Qin's eldest sister.
Yes.
Jingyu lowered her head slightly. "Come here. Let me see what Chen Er's taste is like." Xiao Peibai waved his hand at Jingyu as he spoke. Jingyu lowered her head and slowly walked forward, letting the eldest princess take a good look. She felt helpless in her heart. What was there to look at so close? Not bad. She's a beautiful woman. Xiao Peibai nodded with a faint smile and said, "Come, since it's our first meeting, I don't have much to give you. This is my favorite pair of bracelets. Since you didn't wear any jewelry, I'll give them to you." "Many thanks, Your Highness." Jingyu looked at the bracelet indifferently. She was not interested in it at all. Why give me a bracelet? Just give me money. Really? Jingyu did not dare to say these words. She only dared to accept the bracelet and thank her. She slowly sat down in front of everyone's envious gazes. She looked around and saw Shangguan Linglan and Ning Shangyuan sitting not far away. However, she inadvertently saw Jingyu sitting diagonally across from her. That pair of eyes that made people feel uncomfortable were staring at Jingyu. Jingyu's face immediately darkened. The poetry contest continued under the flattery of everyone. The eldest princess seemed to really care about Jingyu. Just look at this poetry contest. When a few people started to talk about poems, the eldest princess would lead the topic to Jingyu. This scared Jingyu to death. After this poetry contest, Jingyu's head was about to explode. She worked hard to search for the pitiful few verses in her head. She was afraid that if she did not match well, she would become a joke. Fortunately, Jingyu casually matched 2 verses and said that she was not good at this. That was the end of it. Chapter 76. Eldest Princess Xiao Peibai nodded in satisfaction. It seemed like Jingyu had learned something. She wasn't someone who didn't know anything. Jingyu secretly wiped the sweat off her forehead. Hearing the eldest princess let everyone have fun, she finally let out a sigh of relief. She was scared to death. Jingyu drank a mouthful of water to calm herself down. Then, she saw Shangguan Linglan walk over. He happily patted Jingyu's shoulder and said, "Not bad. The 2 lines of the poem just now were very well matched." Hee hee. It's purely my imagination. Jingyu laughed awkwardly. How could she have matched it? It was completely copied from the 300 Tang poems. Luckily, she had trained on this subject in the past. Otherwise, she would have lost a lot of face today. Why are you all here? Jingyu stood up and looked sideways at Shangguan Linglan and Ning Xiangyuan. Why else? We all came with our mother. Shangguan Linglan shrugged slightly and said. Ning Xiangyuan also nodded, indicating that she also came with her mother. Jingyu then realized that it was their mothers who brought their daughters. Now that the children were gathered together, the mothers were trying to worm their way into being friends with the eldest princess. This manor is really big. Look at the blooming lotus flowers. They are so beautiful. Ning Xiangyuan followed Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan into the manor and pointed at the pond full of lotus flowers as she spoke. It's okay. I have a lot of lotus flowers in my courtyard. Jingyu glanced at it and calmly retracted her gaze as she spoke. Really? Next time, if I have the chance, I will go to your manor to take a look. Speaking of which, I haven't been to the 9th Emperor's manor yet. Ning Xiangyuan excitedly shouted as she spoke. I want to go too. Shangguan Linglan looked firmly at Jingyu as he spoke. Jingyu was slightly stunned. Looking at the 2 men's wolf-like expressions, she tugged at the corners of her mouth and said, Fine, fine, fine. Isn't it just an imperial residence? What's there to see? Oh, the 2 of them cheered. They were already guessing what the legendary palace of the 9th Emperors looked like. Jingyu rolled her eyes helplessly. As she was walking, she was suddenly bumped into by a servant girl who was walking towards her. The servant girl quickly bowed and apologized. Jingyu waved her hand carelessly and did not notice the strange look in the servant girl's eyes as she turned around and left. Jingyu, look over there. That's the hunting grounds. I heard that the eldest princess often goes there to hunt. Shangguan Linglan pointed enviously at the encirclement of the manor. Let's get one in the future too, a bigger one. Jingyu waved her hand generously. That's right, let's also encircle a mountain. We can do whatever we want in there. Shangguan Linglan looked at Jingyu's expression and immediately said, That's good, but where do we have the money? Ning Xiangyuan blinked her eyes and exposed this bloody fact. Instantly, Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan were stunned. They looked at each other and silently turned to leave. Money? It's just money. Huh? The 2 of them laughed as they walked away, leaving Ning Xiangyuan in a daze. In the end, she wanted to catch up to Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan, but she didn't expect to hear a strange sound coming from behind the fence. She immediately stopped and turned to look. The strange sound became louder and louder. Finally, under Ning Xiangyuan's astonished gaze, a striped tiger broke through the fence and roared as it ran towards Ning Xiangyuan. Chapter 77. Ah! That earth-shattering scream made Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan turn around abruptly. They immediately saw the tiger pouncing towards Ning Xiangyuan. Run! Shangguan Linglan didn't hesitate at all. He immediately ran towards Ning Xiangyuan and pushed her aside. The tiger, having lost its target, Ning Xiangyuan, went straight for Jingyu. Shangguan Linglan hugged Ning Xiangyuan and rolled on the ground. His head hurt, but before he could feel the pain, he suddenly saw the tiger pouncing towards Jingyu. He was so scared that his face turned pale. He even forgot to scream, "Ah, tiger! There's a tiger! The tiger has run out! Ah!" Panicked screams rang out everywhere as everyone ran in all directions. Jingyu finally came back to her senses. Looking at the ferocious tiger that was already in front of her, her expression suddenly changed. She hurriedly ran to the side and dodged the tiger's attack. However, she didn't expect that the tiger seemed to have locked onto Jingyu. It didn't chase after her at all. Its sharp claws fiercely pounced towards Jingyu. Jingyu didn't have any weapons in her hands. She couldn't fight against the tiger. She rolled a few times, but still couldn't avoid the tiger's attack. Damn it! Jingyu panted heavily. The dress she was wearing was too restrictive. Just as Jingyu knelt on the ground and wanted to tear off the dress, the tiger pounced on Jingyu. Jingyu stared at the tiger pouncing towards her with wide eyes. It's over. It's over. I'm going to die in the tiger's mouth today. This was probably the only thought in Jingyu's mind right now. However, just as this thought appeared in Jingyu's mind, there was a sudden sound of something breaking through the air. A silver-white sword was placed horizontally in front of the tiger. Jingyu only saw a blur in front of her. Then, she saw a man in embroidered clothes wave his sword and force the tiger to retreat. Jingyu! Shangguan Linglan finally reacted. He suddenly opened his mouth and shouted for Jingyu. Jingyu didn't turn to look at Shangguan Linglan. Instead, she looked at the man who was about to fight with the tiger. The man's martial arts were extraordinary, but the tiger seemed to be on steroids. It went berserk. The man was too slow, and his arm was injured by the tiger's sharp claws. The blood agitated the tiger roared even more. Jingyu's expression. Jingyu's face slowly turned cold. Shangguan Linglan ran to Jingyu's side to see if Jingyu was injured. He didn't expect Jingyu to suddenly turn her head to look above her. "Lend me your hairpin." Jingyu didn't hesitate. She took the hairpin from Shangguan Linglan's head and rushed toward the tiger without any hesitation. Jingyu! Shangguan Linglan was so scared that his face turned pale. He didn't have time to react. He looked up and saw Jingyu suddenly jump up and hit the tiger with her knee. Obviously, the man with the sword was also shocked. Seeing Jingyu's actions, his eyes widened in shock. Beast! Jingyu's knee hit the tiger's neck. The hairpin in her hand pierced the tiger's neck, but it didn't go all the way. Quiet! Jingyu stepped on the tiger's head. The tiger cried out in pain and knelt on the ground. Jingyu pressed the tiger's head firmly. Her pair of cold eyes met the tiger's gaze in a corner where no one could see. Jingyu's pitch-black eyes suddenly turned dark green. They glowed with a wild light. An irresistible command came out of her mouth. Quiet. Chapter 78. Everyone was frightened by the scene in front of them. The man with the sword suddenly remembered and quickly rushed over to kill the tiger. However, he was stopped by Jingyu. Stop! The man was slightly stunned. Only then did he realize that the fierce tiger was panting heavily and lying motionless on the ground. It's fine now. Jingyu sat down on the ground and raised her hand to pull out the hairpin that had sunk half an inch into the fierce tiger's neck. Woo! The tiger whimpered in pain. It blinked its eyes and looked at Jingyu with fear. Jingyu slowly let out a sigh of relief. Suddenly, she felt like she was about to collapse. The tiger was released, and it opened its bloody mouth. Immediately, the vigilant man was shocked. He suddenly tightened his grip on the long sword in his hand. Jingyu raised her hand to press the tiger's head and said, "Don't be noisy." Sure enough, the tiger obediently lowered its head and didn't dare to move. Suddenly, the man with the long sword was stunned. He looked at Jingyu as if she was a monster. He turned his head and said, "You know the language of beasts? You know how to tame beasts?" Jingyu was slightly stunned when she heard this. Only then did she raise her head to look at the man standing beside her. His dark blue robes were tattered, and his starry eyes revealed a sense of alienation. His thick eyebrows were slightly furrowed as he stared at Jingyu. "Who are you? Who are you?" The two of them blurted out the moment they looked at each other. The words that came out of their mouths in unison stunned the two of them. A strange feeling flashed through their hearts. It was as if they were old acquaintances who had met again after a long time. There was a sense of familiarity amidst the unfamiliarity. Jingyu, Jingyu, Are you okay? Shangguan Linglan looked at the motionless tiger lying on the ground and thought that it was already dead. He hurriedly ran over and pulled Jingyu, who was covered in mud, up and down. As he looked, tears welled up in his eyes. Do you want to die? This isn't a small animal. How dare you rush over like this? Shangguan Linglan's eyes were red as he roared at Jingyu. That. Jingyu looked at Shangguan Linglan's teary eyes and immediately panicked. She wanted to find an excuse, but she didn't know what to say. She could only raise her muddy hands to wipe the tears on Shangguan Linglan's face and say, I'm fine. Don't cry. Go away. Shangguan Linglan angrily slapped Jingyu's hands away and stared at Jingyu. Suddenly, he smiled and slowly let out a sigh of relief. He raised his head to look at the man standing by the side with a frown. He stood up and bowed slightly. Thank you, young Master Jing, for saving my life. Jing. Jingyu also stood up and raised her head to look at the tall man in front of her. A strange thought flashed through her mind. You're Jingyu. The man called young Master Jing had a strange look in his eyes. He looked at Jingyu from head to toe. His fervent gaze made Jingyu's hair stand on end. Oh my God, this handsome guy can't be interested in me, right? With that thought, Jingyu immediately hid behind Shangguan Linglan with a look that said, I'm not interested in you. She didn't dare to be interested. If Xiao Qin found out that she was hooking up with another man outside, based on Xiao Qin's temper, he would probably chop her into minced meat and feed her to this tiger. Young Master Jing, do you know each other? Shangguan Linglan was slightly stunned and asked with a frown. We don't know each other. We don't know each other. Jingyu and the man said this almost at the same time. Shangguan Linglan's eyes widened, and he looked at Jingyu with a scrutinizing gaze. How could the two of you have such tacit understanding when you don't know each other? It's fine if it happened once, but why is it happening every time? Chapter 79. Jinglang, are you all right? Just as Shangguan Linglan was about to speak, he saw two men hurriedly running over. It was clear that they had just received the news. Greetings, Prince Consort. Shangguan Linglan looked at the people running over and hurriedly pulled Jingyu to pay respects. Jingyu was slightly surprised and didn't say anything as she followed suit. Quickly get up. Are you all right? The man who spoke was around 40 years old and had an amiable appearance. He was the eldest princess's husband and the prince consort of Tokyo, Xiao Weiming. We're fine. Shangguan Linglan and Jingyu both took a few steps back and shook their heads. It's good, it's good. It's good that you're fine. Jinglang is indeed a young hero. You were actually able to subdue this fierce tiger by yourself. Xiao Weiming smiled with praise as he looked at the man who was standing in a sorry state but didn't look any different. Jinglang was about to speak when he saw Jingyu's gaze. Jingyu was shocked. This person better not say that she was the one who subdued this tiger. If he said that, it would be over. She didn't want to be locked up by this group of ancient people to be studied. Whoa, big brother, you better not tell the truth. This tiger was a bit weak, which was why I subdued it. It can't be called a hero. Jinglang looked at Jingyu's shocked and pleading expression and revealed a faint smile as he turned to speak to Xiao Weiming. Ha ha ha. Jinglang, you're too humble. Xiao Weiming laughed and looked at the tiger that seemed to have fainted on the ground. He frowned and said, This tiger doesn't have any attack power, right? Jinglang was slightly surprised when he heard this and turned to look at Jingyu. Jingyu shook her head at Jinglang, indicating that the tiger didn't have any attack power. Yes, Prince Consort should quickly tie this tiger up and send it to the hunting grounds to find out why it appeared here. Jinglang lowered his head and said, All right, this Prince Consort will definitely give you guys an explanation. Xiao Weiming nodded with a serious expression. Fortunately, no one died today. Otherwise, it would be difficult for the princess royal residence to escape the blame. Jingyu watched as the tiger was carried back to the hunting grounds. Only then did she heave a sigh of relief. Her legs gave way and she sat down on a rock at the side, unable to move. Jingyu was puzzled. When did she become so weak? It was as if all the strength in his body had been sucked out. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Jingyu narrowed her eyes slightly. She didn't think of herself as a delicate woman. She had been outside for a long time, so her reaction speed was still sharp. However, today, Jingyu clearly felt that her reaction speed had decreased. It was very strange that her hands and feet felt weak. If it wasn't for Jinglang's help, she would have been torn apart by the tiger in her current state. Are you all right? Just as Jingyu was deep in thought, a question sounded in her ears. Jingyu was slightly surprised. She looked up and saw that Jinglang was looking at her with a frown. I'm not. Jingyu wanted to say that she was fine, but she saw Jinglang squat down in front of her with his back facing her. He slightly tilted his head and said, "Come up." That? I'm really not. Jingyu was shocked and quickly waved her hand to refuse. Jinglang's voice suddenly turned cold as he said, "Do you want me to carry you back?" Sob, sob, sob. Why were all the men she met so unreasonable? Did they want her to live? Chapter 80. Jingyu laid on Jinglang's back. The warmth from his broad back made Jingyu slightly absent-minded. She tilted her head and looked at Jinglang's face. The struggle in her heart became even more intense. This man couldn't have taken a liking to her, right? Ahem. That, you're called Jinglang? Jingyu coughed and asked. And Jinglang replied with a single word. His cold appearance was almost as cold as Xiao Qin's. Wait, why did she keep thinking of Xiao Qin recently? You're Jingyan's? Jingyu's eyes turned slightly as she asked again. Jinglang suddenly stopped talking. He silently carried Jingyu to the place where the poetry gathering was held. When the group of girls saw Jinglang carrying Jingyu back, they all let out a sigh of relief. Xiao Weiming also walked to the eldest princess' side and told everyone what happened. Brother Lang. Just as Jinglang put Jingyu down, Jingyan quickly walked over and called out timidly. This immediately made Jingyu tremble violently. Do you need me to send you back? Jinglang glanced at Jingyan without giving her any expression. He turned his head and asked Jingyu, who was sitting down. No need. Jingyu decisively refused. She pulled Shangguan Linglan, who was standing to the side, over and said with a smile, She's enough. My carriage is at the door. And Jinglang nodded and turned to leave. Jingyan looked at Jinglang's cold appearance and bit her lips slightly. She glared at Jingyu with an angry gaze. Jingyu blinked and looked back at Jingyan provocatively. Look, what are you looking at? If you keep looking, I'll have to pay you. Jingyu, you're really lucky, Jingyu said coldly and turned to leave. Jingyu was stunned for a moment. Looking at Jingyan's back, a cold glint flashed across her eyes. When they returned to the prince's residence, Jingyu almost fell asleep in the carriage. However, she was still woken up in a daze. Xiao was really frightened today. She squatted beside Jingyu and didn't dare to leave her side. Her red eyes were obviously from crying. Imperial concubine. Jingyu opened her eyes and looked at Xiao's appearance. She sighed and raised her hand to support her forehead, saying, Your imperial concubine is not dead yet. Why are you crying? I'm so tired and hungry. Quickly go and prepare something to eat. Yes. Hearing Jingyu say that she was hungry, Xiao quickly agreed. Jingyu jumped down from the carriage and walked into the residence. She felt that the residence was very quiet today. Frowning slightly, she didn't think much of it and turned to return to her own courtyard. After eating her fill, she took a bath and laid on the large bed. She narrowed her eyes and thought about today's events. Xiao. Jingyu felt that something was wrong the more she thought about it. She suddenly sat up and shouted towards the outside. What orders does Imperial Concubine have? Xiao quickly walked in and bowed. Don't wash the clothes that I just changed out of. Go and find a physician to take a look. Jingyu sat cross-legged on the bed and said, Imperial Concubine, are you not feeling well? Xiao was shocked. She frowned and looked nervously at Jingyu. I'm fine. Jingyu frowned in annoyance. She glared at Xiao and said, If I tell you to go, then go. Why do you have so much nonsense to say? Yes. Xiao didn't dare to say anything else. She quickly asked someone to invite a doctor over. When she came back, she saw Jingyu staring at her clothes that were covered in mud in a daze. She had a puzzled look and was mumbling something that no one knew what she was saying. Imperial Concubine, the person is here, Xiao said. Jingyu then turned to look. Chapter 81. This commoner pays his respects to the ninth imperial concubine. The doctor carrying the medicine box seemed to be startled by Jingyu's strange actions. He paused for a moment before hurriedly paying his respects. Aya, don't kneel. Come over here. Jingyu helplessly rolled her eyes. She waved her hand at the doctor and called him over. She pointed at the clothes on the table and said, "Take a look and see if there's anything wrong with them." The doctor was slightly stunned. He looked at Jingyu with a tearless expression and said, "Ninth imperial concubine, this commoner is a doctor, not a tailor. Towards these clothes, I really can't see anything wrong with them." "What are you talking about? I'm just asking you to see if there's anything on them. For example, powder, spices, or something that can make a person feel weak all over." Jingyu patted her head and pointed at the clothes as she spoke to the doctor. The doctor was slightly stunned when he heard this. He then hurriedly checked the clothes. "So it wasn't to see a doctor. How is it? Is there a result?" Jingyu blinked her eyes and looked at the doctor expectantly. "Other than dirt and sweat, I didn't find anything else," the doctor said seriously to Jingyu. Jingyu's face darkened. She glared at the doctor and said, "You even found dirt and sweat? I'm not blind. I can see it. Hurry up and leave." Jingyu angrily chased the doctor out. She stared at the clothes with a confused expression. Was she thinking too much? Or was she wrong? Jingyu furrowed her brows. After thinking for a while, she still decided to ask Xiao Chen. "Where's Xiao Chen?" Jingyu wanted to run over to Xiao Chen excitedly, but she was stopped by Yin Xiao. Yin Xiao said that Xiao Chen wasn't in the residence. The ninth emperors went out of the city to handle some matters. He hasn't returned yet. Yin Xiao bowed to Jingyu and said, "All right, let me know when he comes back." Jingyu sighed helplessly and went back to her room. She waited for a long time, but Xiao Chun didn't come back. Even Xing Yi and Xing Er were nowhere to be seen. She waited until night fell. Jingyu yawned and couldn't help falling asleep. Half asleep and half awake, Jingyu was sleeping comfortably. Suddenly, she felt a pair of hands taking off her clothes. Although it was very gentle, Jingyu still felt it. She frowned, wanting to sleep and wake up. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. But when Jingyu felt a chill, she shivered and opened her eyes. She looked down at her undergarment and screamed in horror. "Ah!" "Shut up!" A cold shout came. Jingyu covered her mouth and looked at the angry Xiao Chen in horror. She couldn't say anything for a long time. You, why are you so? I'm only 14. Jingyu hugged her body tightly and complained to Xiao Chen. "What dirty things are in your head?" Xiao Chen's face darkened. He looked coldly at Jingyu and said, "You were attacked today? Let me see if you're injured." You took off my clothes to see if I'm injured?" Jingyu was slightly stunned. She blinked and asked Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen replied indifferently. He lowered his eyes and said, "I only found out when I came back. Sorry." Xiao Chen's breathing paused as he spoke. He bent over and stared at Jingyu. His apologetic eyes made Jingyu's heart tremble. She pursed her lips and lowered her head, not daring to look at Xiao Chen. Chapter 82. I'm not injured. Jingyu lowered her eyes and said, "Next time, if you want to know if I'm injured, just wake me up and ask. Who would take off someone's clothes in the middle of the night?" Jingyu's cheeks turned slightly red as she spoke. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at Xiao Chen. "Are you shy?" Xiao Chen's lips curled into a faint smile as he raised his hand to press down on Jingyu's head. I'm not." Jingyu's face turned red as she raised her head to deny it. However, when she met Xiao Chen's smiling eyes, her cheeks turned even redder. She hurriedly pulled the blanket over her head and said in a muffled voice, "Time to sleep." Xiao Chen looked at Jingyu, who was still as energetic as ever, and slowly let out a sigh of relief. The fear he felt when he heard that Jingyu had been attacked slowly dissipated. He never thought that there would be a day when he would be so worried about someone without realizing it. At this moment, Xiao Chen realized that there was something strange about himself. He was actually afraid of losing Jingyu. Why was that? Xiao Chen's eyes were filled with doubt. He never thought that he would lose himself for a woman. There was nothing that he couldn't give up. Wealth, power, and women had never mattered to him. However, when he heard that Jingyu had been attacked after returning to the city today, he felt as though he had lost something very important in an instant. It terrified him. He was terrified. Although it was a very light feeling, it was enough for Xiao Chen to feel. That night, Xiao Chen couldn't sleep for a long time. He frowned as he looked at Jingyu's sleeping face. They had only known each other for a few days, so why did he have such a strange thought? Xiao Chen sighed softly as he raised his hand to hug Jingyu. That familiar scent entered Xiao Chen's nose, causing him to greedily move closer to her. In the morning, Jingyu stretched lazily and opened her eyes. The moment she saw Xiao Chen's eyes, she was slightly stunned. Even though she had slept with Xiao Chen for so long, Jingyu still felt that Xiao Chen was really handsome. Gulp. Jingyu swallowed her saliva as she stared at Xiao Chen and said, "Let me interview you. How do you feel about being so handsome since you were young?" Handsome? What? Xiao Chen frowned as he looked at Jingyu in confusion. That is to say that you're very good-looking and handsome. Jingyu's eyes turned slightly as she explained. So you're saying that I'm very good-looking? Xiao Chen's lips curled into a happy smile as he propped his head up and looked at Jingyu with a smug look on his face. That get up? Jingyu waved her hands wildly with a slightly embarrassed expression. How come she didn't know that Xiao Chen could be narcissistic? Jingyu was about to run off the bed as she spoke, but when she stepped over Xiao Chen, she tripped over Xiao Chen and fell straight into his arms. Xiao Chen wrapped his arms around Jingyu and hugged her tightly. He flipped over and pressed down on top of her. When he saw the shocked expression on Jingyu's face, there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. You don't have to go to school today. Why are you in such a hurry? Xiao Chen's finger lightly touched Jingyu's cheek as he spoke with narrowed eyes. I want to go shopping. Jingyu's eyes turned as she looked at Xiao Chen. There's no hurry. It's still early. Xiao Chen narrowed his eyes as he looked at Jingyu's embarrassed expression. He lowered his head and buried it in Jingyu's neck as he said in a calm voice, "I'll have Xing stay by your side. He'll be responsible for your safety in the future. I don't want to see what happened yesterday ever again." Chapter 83. Jinglang saved me yesterday. Do you know him? Jingyu's body stiffened slightly as she felt the scorching breath on her neck. Her body was so stiff that she didn't dare to move. Jinglang. Xiao Cheng raised his head and looked at Jingyu with furrowed brows. He actually came back to the capital? MHM? You know him? Jingyu blinked and looked at Xiao Chun as she asked. For some reason, Jingyu felt a sense of familiarity with Jinglang. This feeling made Jingyu want to know more about this person. He is Jing Zhan's son. If it wasn't for Jinglang, Jing Zhan might have already been killed by the second master of the Prime Minister Manor. Xiao Chen propped himself up and sat up. Turning his eyes slightly, he looked at Jingyu and said, Jinglang is at the North Gate. He is a general in charge of the 3 armies. Him? General? Jingyu's eyes widened. She also sat up and said in surprise. Thinking of Jinglang's appearance, he didn't look like a general at all. He looked more like, what was he? Jingyu didn't know. Jinglang went to the battlefield when he was 10 years old. He fought for over 10 years and sat on the position of general. He guarded the North Gate and was in charge of the 3 armies. This time, he suddenly came back to the capital. I'm afraid he came back for the matter of the crown prince. Xiao Chen got off the bed and picked up the outer robe on the screen to put it on. Over 10 years. Jingyu's eyes showed a faint surprise. Hugging her knees, she watched Xiao Chen put on his clothes and asked, Then he hasn't come back to the capital in over 10 years? Then what about his father? Who didn't know Jing Zhan's name over 10 years ago? Although his legs are crippled now, he is not a cripple. He has been in the capital for so long and has no intention of retreating. The second master of the Prime Minister Manor has been fighting for the position of master for over 10 years, but he is still only a substitute master. Xiao Chen buckled his belt and said indifferently, Wow, it sounds amazing. Jingyu blinked her eyes in surprise. But why are you suddenly so interested in the Jing family? Xiao Chen frowned unhappily as he looked at Jingyu. Jingyu was slightly flustered by Xiao Chen's scrutinizing gaze and hurriedly said, That person saved me, so I have to know who that person is. Hearing this, Xiaochen slowly turned his gaze away. He clasped his hands behind his back and stared at Jingyu as he said, I will send someone to investigate what happened yesterday. If you want to go out, bring more guards with you. I will be very busy in the next few days. If you want to find me, ask Xing'er to find me. Oh. Jingyu blinked and nodded at Xiaochen. Remember to miss me. Xiaochen bent down and gently planted a kiss on Jingyu's lips. There was a faint joy in his eyes. He didn't care about the petrified Jingyu as he turned and strode away. Just now. Was I being teased? Jingyu blinked and covered her face. When Jingyu finished washing up and went out, she saw Xing'er standing at the entrance of Jingyu's room with a long sword in his hand. That expressionless face made Jingyu's good mood instantly disappear. Woo-woo. Why did she have to bring this blockhead out with her? Imperial concubine. Where are we going? Yin Xiao followed closely beside Jingyu. Looking at the bustling street, she was afraid that Jingyu would disappear if she wasn't careful, so she asked nervously. I don't know. Let's play. Jingyu shrugged and said generously. Chapter 84. Yin Xiao's face instantly turned bitter. Oh right. Did you bring any money? Jingyu suddenly stopped in her tracks and asked while looking at Yin Xiao and second Xing. Yin Xiao blinked slightly and shook her head. Xing'er just stared at Jingyu in a daze. This made Jingyu start to suspect that this Xing'er didn't even know what money was. Jingyu held her chin and sat on the stone embankment by the river. She swung her legs and sighed as she looked at the ripples in the water. She turned to look at Xing'er, who was standing there like a block of wood, and asked, Did Yin Xiao come back? Xing'er shook his head. I should have let you go get the money. You didn't say anything for half a day. I was bored to death. Jingyu glared at Xing'er angrily. Xing'er felt wronged. Master had strictly forbidden him from having any intimate contact with the imperial concubine. If he could speak less, then he shouldn't. He just had to protect the imperial concubine. Right now, he was perfectly carrying out his master's orders. He wasn't slacking off at all. Jingyu looked at Xing'er, who didn't even change his expression, and instantly got angry. She stood on the stone embankment and angrily pointed at Xing'er and said, I don't believe that I won't make you laugh today. Jingyu grimaced and made funny faces at Xing'er. She looked like she was having a seizure. Jingyu was tired to death, but Xing'er still didn't move at all. Xing'er looked at Jingyu and silently said in his heart, Master, quickly send the imperial concubine to the insane prison. I can't take it anymore. Jingyu. Just as Jingyu was about to give up, a shout suddenly came from behind her. Jingyu turned around in confusion and forgot that she was still standing on the stone embankment. She stepped on air and fell into the lake. Imperial concubine. Second interrogation officer's eyes trembled. He abruptly reached out and grabbed Jingyu's hand, forcefully pulling it back. He took 2 steps back and looked at the shocked Jingyu in his arms. He slowly breathed a sigh of relief and let go of her hand. Lowering his head, he said, Sorry for offending you. Your reaction is fast enough. Jingyu slowly let out a sigh of relief and happily patted Xing'er's shoulder as she spoke. Jingyu, are you okay? A familiar voice was heard. Jingyu finally saw the person who was walking over with a frightened expression. It was Fang Zicheng and Jing Lang? I'm fine. Why are you guys here? Jingyu blinked and asked Fang Zicheng and Jing Lang. Jing Lang and I haven't seen each other in a long time, so we agreed to meet today. I didn't expect to see you here. Fang Zicheng looked Jingyu up and down. After confirming that Jingyu wasn't injured, he slowly let out a sigh of relief. He looked at Jingyu and then at the stone embankment with a look of blame in his eyes. How dare you stand on that stone embankment? You really don't care about your own safety. Fang Zicheng reprimanded. Ha ha ha. I'm fine. Jingyu stuck out her tongue and looked at Fang Zicheng and Jing Lang. Where did you two want to go? Take me with you. I'm bored to death. We're going to Jinyan restaurant. Are you coming too? Fang Zicheng looked at Jingyu and blinked. Jinyan restaurant? A place to eat? Jingyu's eyes lit up when she heard this. Hey, don't tell me you don't have money to eat again? Fang Zicheng looked at Jingyu's hungry face and suddenly widened his eyes in horror. How many times has it been? Watching Jingyu freeload every day. Chapter 85. Jingyu looked at Feng Ziqing and said seriously, cough, 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 that. My maid went back to get the money, but I think she must have gotten lost. Xing'er inexplicably felt that today was definitely the most embarrassing day of his life. This was the first time Jingyu had been to the Jinyan restaurant. Seeing the magnificent decorations, Jingyu couldn't help but sigh at the domineering style of the ancient architects. They were actually able to decorate this place so beautifully. TSK, this is a good place. Jingyu couldn't help but look around. The exquisite decorations, the beautiful gauze hanging from the roof beams, the sound of bamboo flutes coming from the loft, and the ladies sitting upright and playing the zither. Which one of them wasn't a peerless beauty? Wow, what a beautiful lady! Jingyu looked at the beautiful lady holding the pipa and singing. Her lecherous eyes made Xing'er want to throw Jingyu out. Let's go in. Feng Ziqing practically dragged Jingyu into the private room. After entering the private room, he wiped the sweat from his forehead. This lady was simply too eye-catching. Every time he was with Jingyu, Feng Ziqing wanted to cry but had no tears. Was she really a woman? Hey, how about we also get a beauty to sing for us? Jingyu looked at the isolated door and blinked her eyes as she looked at Feng Ziqing and said excitedly, No. Feng Ziqing didn't even think about it and immediately rejected her. Why? Don't you like beautiful ladies? Jingyu looked at Feng Ziqing unhappily. Seeing Feng Ziqing's slightly red cheeks, her eyes suddenly lit up. She carefully moved to Feng Ziqing's side and asked, Don't tell me you have a homosexual fetish? Jing Lang suddenly spat out the tea in his mouth and looked at Jingyu in horror. Oh my god, don't tell me the two of you. Jingyu looked at Jing Lang, who instantly burst out laughing, and then looked at Feng Ziqing, who was completely dumbfounded. She immediately revealed an expression that said, See, I guessed it right. She smiled ambiguously at the two of them, revealing an expression that said, I knew it. Feng Ziqing's face was getting redder and redder. He didn't know if it was because of anger or something else, but he couldn't say anything for a long time. You think too much. I don't like men. Jing Lang forcefully suppressed his surging desire and spoke to Jingyu with a serious expression. Could it be your unrequited love? Jingyu suddenly turned her head to look at Feng Ziqing and said with pity, I can understand how it feels when the man you like doesn't like you back. It's okay. You'll find a better man in the future. My condolences. Jingyu. Feng Ziqing suddenly stood up and stared angrily at Jingyu as he said, If you continue to speak nonsense and ruin my reputation, get out. Ayaya. I just said it casually. I was joking. When Jingyu saw that Feng Ziqing was angry and wanted to chase her away, she thought that she hadn't eaten yet. She hurriedly smiled at Feng Ziqing in a flattering manner, feeling like she was apologizing. Come, have some tea. Jingyu poured tea for Feng Ziqing like a lackey and served Feng Ziqing like a lord. Feng Ziqing looked at Jingyu and snorted as he picked up the tea and drank it. After the dishes were served, Jing Lang saw for the first time that a woman could eat a man's domineering aura. Chapter 86. After the dishes were served, Jing Lang realized for the first time that a woman could emit a man's domineering aura while eating. Look at the way Jingyu ate. She didn't look like a woman at all. Her sleeves were rolled up, and her mouth was wide open. It was as if she hadn't eaten in hundreds of years. Jing Lang was dumbstruck and completely forgot to eat. Is your prince's estate very poor? Jing Lang asked as he stared blankly at Xing'er, who was standing behind Jingyu. How embarrassing. Xing'er silently turned his head away, as if he didn't want to see Jingyu. The food in Jinyan restaurant is really good. It's delicious. Jingyu rubbed her round belly in satisfaction. She looked at Xing'er with a smile and said, Go back and ask Xiao Chun if we can invite the chef of Jinyan restaurant to our home. Yes. Xing'er was slightly surprised, but he actually spoke. Damn, you actually spoke. Jingyu suddenly jumped up in excitement. Feng Ziqing slowly wiped his mouth. He blinked and looked at Xing'er, then turned his head to look at Jingyu and asked, could it be that he didn't know how to speak before? He didn't. Jingyu shook her head in all seriousness. He did. Xing silently spat out a word. Suddenly, the entire private room fell into a short silence. Aya, he said another word. It's not easy, it's not easy. Jingyu looked as if she had seen a treasure. She looked at Second Xing and sighed. Second Xing silently lowered his head and stood in the corner without saying anything. Fang Ziqing looked at the two of them and laughed out loud. Jingyu, you're really too interesting. Fang Ziqing laughed. Jingyu glared at Fang Ziqing. She turned around and leaned against the windowsill, looking at the people coming and going below without saying a word. It was rare for Jingyu to be quiet. Only then did Fang Ziqing and Jing Lang start to talk. At first, they just asked about the recent situation. Those polite words made Jingyu yawn. This feeling of wanting to sleep after eating was really hopeless. Jingyu narrowed her eyes and looked at the street below. Just as she was wondering if she could see a handsome guy, her sharp ears overheard the conversation between Fang Ziqing and Jing Lang. Is there still no news of your sister? Fang Ziqing asked, holding the teacup in his hand. No. Jing Lang's eyes dimmed slightly as he lowered his head. It's been 14 years. Could he have died in the stomach of a wild beast? Fang Ziqing asked with a sigh. No, she must be alive. Jing Lang clenched his fists and said, I will find her. It's been 14 years. Why are you so persistent? Fang Ziqing pursed his lips and looked at Jing Lang. Ziqing, she is my biological sister. We finally found my mother's body after her death, but we didn't find my sister's body. My mother must have hidden her. No matter what, I have to find her. Jing Lang looked at Fang Ziqing with a burning gaze. What if your sister is really dead? Jing Yu's sudden interruption stunned Jing Lang. He then looked at Jing Yu and said firmly, if she is alive, I want to see her. If she is dead, I want to see her body. Jing Yu pursed her lips and lowered her head. She tilted her head and continued to look out the window. Your sister, where was she abandoned? Roman forest. Jing Lang looked at Jing Yu's back and said, why did you abandon her? Jing Lang couldn't see Jing Yu's expression clearly. He could only hear Jing Yu's calm words. Chapter 87. Jing Lang took a deep breath and said, her parents were being hunted down. In order to save her life, they had no choice but to hide her. How unforgivable, abandoning their own child. Jing Yu slowly stood up and said calmly, even if they had to die together, they couldn't abandon their own child. How can you say that? That was to save her life. Jing Lang's expression turned cold as he stared at Jing Yu. So what if they saved her life? Let her fend for herself outside for 14 years? Didn't she know that her parents were being laughed at as bastards? That she had no one to talk to about her grief? That she had to suffer alone in the cold? That she had to bear her own injuries and tears? What was the point of saving her life like that? She might as well follow her parents to the Yellow Springs. As soon as Jing Yu finished speaking, Jing Lang felt a sudden pain in his heart. He raised his eyes and met Jing Yu's pair of icy cold eyes that were filled with alienation. A look of panic flashed across his eyes. You don't have to look for them. If I were her, even if I was alone, I would never acknowledge a father and brother that suddenly appeared. Jing Yu turned around and walked towards the door of the pavilion. Without hesitation, she opened the door and strode out. Xing Er's eyes flashed. He glanced at Jing Yu and followed Jing Yu's footsteps down the stairs. Inside the pavilion, Jing Lang fell silent. Jing Yu's words reverberated in his ears, causing him to feel a dull pain in his heart. He was so focused on finding his sister that he had neglected such an important matter. Yes, if she had really survived these 14 years, how would she have lived through it? Would she have thought that her parents had abandoned her and developed resentment in her heart? Ziqing, what should I do? Jing Lang lowered his head and stared blankly at the table. Perhaps Jing Yu is right. Fang Ziqing sighed silently. He wondered why Jing Yu had such a big reaction when she heard this. While comforting Jing Lang in a low voice, he called for several jars of fine wine, and the two of them would not return until they were drunk. Jing Yu was exceptionally silent on the way back to the mansion. Xing Er silently followed beside her. His lips moved slightly as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't open his mouth. He just watched as Jing Yu walked back to the mansion with her head lowered. Jingyu walked into her room. Xing'er opened his mouth slightly and was about to tell her to call him if she needed anything. Unexpectedly, Jingyu turned around and closed the door. She said in a muffled voice, "I don't want to eat dinner. Don't disturb me." Second interrogation officer blinked, looking at the tightly shut door and furrowing his brows. This kind of situation, should he report it to his master? Jingyu curled up on the bed with a pair of soulless eyes. Her mind was filled with countless chaotic thoughts. Everything from her previous life flashed through her mind. She was abandoned by her parents on the streets. She slept in the garbage and ate spoiled and moldy food. She was beaten by people and fought with dogs for food. She cried, screamed, and begged. In the end, she was still alone. Once, she met a policeman by accident and was sent to an orphanage. It was also after that she stepped on a path of no return. Jingyu closed her eyes tightly. These thoughts were sealed in her memory forever. She didn't want to think about them. She thought that her current life would be the same as her previous life. She was abandoned and had no parents. She didn't expect. Chapter 88. Hee. Jingyu chuckled. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt her nose tingle. Jingyu sat up and sighed softly. "It's been a long time since I went to see Yin Jian and Yin Feng." Jingyu stood up and got off the bed. When she opened the door, she realized that there was no one there. Yin Xiao wasn't there, and neither was Xing'er. She was stunned for a moment, but didn't think too much about it. She turned around and went to the side courtyard. Sure enough, she saw Yin Jian and Yin Feng playing around. Two bad guys. Jingyu laughed and scolded them. She quickly ran over and played with the two gray wolves, rolling around on the grass to her heart's content. As the night deepened, Jingyu leaned on Yin Jian's back and closed her eyes. She sniffed the smell of the soil and grass. In a trance, she seemed to have returned to the forest. She played around without any worries and flew around every corner of the forest. Jingyu buried her face and rubbed against Yin Feng's soft fur. The corners of her mouth curled up, and she closed her eyes comfortably. Yin Jian moved his body and laid down on Jingyu's body. Yin Feng did the same. The two gray wolves held Jingyu in their arms. Just like the countless times they were in the forest, they watched the sunrise and sunset together and endured the cold winter and hot summer together. Xiao Chun walked into the side chamber and saw this scene. The girl was sleeping soundly in the arms of the two gray wolves. Xiao Chen's expression softened slightly as he adjusted his heavy breathing and heartbeat. Only the heavens knew how panicked he was when he returned to the residence and saw the empty house. Xiao Chun gently walked towards Jingyu. The two gray wolves, Yin Jian and Yin Feng, suddenly opened their eyes and looked at Xiao Chun with vigilance. Xiao Chun paused his steps. They remembered Xiao Chen's scent. Even Jingyu's body was stained with Xiao Chen's scent. Woo! Silver Arrow whimpered and slowly moved its tail away. Silver Wind also moved its tail away reluctantly. Xiao Chen looked at the movements of the two gray wolves, and his eyes flashed slightly. Then, he carefully stepped forward and squatted down to look at Jingyu's face, which was sleeping soundly. Xiao Chen's expression softened slightly. He gently touched Jingyu's cheek and carefully bent down to carry Jingyu. Jingyu frowned uncomfortably and leaned her head against Xiao Chen's chest to continue sleeping. Xiao Chen paused and looked at the two gray wolves on the ground. He smiled and turned to leave. Woo! Xiao Chun had just taken a step when he realized that Yin Jian was biting his lower hem. Xiao Chen frowned and lowered his head. Only then did he see that under Yin Jian's claws, there was a dark green bead strung together with a red string. The beautiful color stunned Xiao Chun. He lowered his head to look at Jingyu in his arms. He remembered that Jingyu always wore this bead around her neck. Why did she take it off? Xiao Chen carefully squatted down to pick up the bead and held it in his hand. He rubbed Yin Jian's head and stood up to leave. Yin Jian looked at Xiao Chen's back, and the whiskers on the side of his mouth trembled slightly, as if he was very happy. He opened his mouth and continued to lie down with a sleepy face. Xiao Chen gently placed Jingyu on the bed. Jingyu turned over and went back to sleep without showing any signs of waking up. Xiao Chun let out a sigh of relief and turned to leave the room. He looked at Xing'er, who was standing at the door, and asked, "Tell this king everything clearly." Chapter 89. Xing'er trembled violently and told Xiaochen everything that happened today. Xiaochen narrowed his eyes and fell into deep thought. Master, should we investigate the matter between Jing Lang and Jing Zhan? Interrogation officer 1 stood at the side and asked. Go investigate what happened 14 years ago. At the same time, investigate the origin of this bead. Xiaochen opened his palm and revealed the dark green bead. He looked at the two of them and said,
Yes.
Xingyi and Xing'er both bowed and acknowledged. Xiaochen then turned around and returned to the room. He took off his outer clothes and laid down beside Jingyu and sighed. After a night of silence, Jingyu woke up and saw the familiar curtain above her head. She blinked and suddenly sat up. Yin Xiao. Jingyu opened her mouth and shouted. This servant is here. Imperial concubine, you're awake? Yin Xiao was startled by Jingyu's shout and hurriedly ran into the room. She looked at Jingyu and asked, Why am I here? Jingyu stared at Yin Xiao and said, It was 9th Imperial Uncle who carried you back. Yin Xiao blinked her eyes and said, Xiaochen is back? Where is he? Jingyu turned her head and looked at the slight mark of a pillow. She turned her head and asked Yin Xiao. The 9th Emperor said he had something to do. The moment the sun rose, the 9th Emperors left with Lord Xing-yi. Yin Xiao bowed and said, The 9th Emperors also told me to give this to you, so that you won't lose it again. Yin Xiao said as she stretched out her hand. A dark green bead lay in her palm. Jingyu was slightly shocked. She raised her hand and touched her neck. Only then did she realize that her neck was empty. The bead on her neck was long gone. So I took it off yesterday and forgot to put it back on. Jingyu reached out and took the bead from Yin Xiao's hand. She sighed and carefully put it back on. She touched the bead and sighed. Are we going to the academy today? Yes, Lord Xing'er is already waiting at the door. Yin Xiao lowered her head and said, Aya, so annoying. Why do we have to go to class? Jingyu stood up angrily and walked to the dressing table at the side to sit down. Once the imperial concubine takes the exam and passes, you don't have to go to class. Yin Xiao looked at Jingyu's angry face and smiled. There's an exam? Jingyu's body shook violently when she heard this. She looked at Yin Xiao with a terrified expression. Yin Xiao gently combed Jingyu's hair. She looked at Jingyu in the mirror and said, Of course. It's said that the exam this year is at the beginning of June. The instructor, Empress Dowager Hu, and the Empress will come. It will be a very grand occasion. My God. Even the Empress Dowager is going. It's over. I'm going to die. Jingyu was so scared that her face turned pale. She looked up at Yin Xiao and asked, What if I don't pass the exam? Don't pass? Yin Xiao's hand paused and said, If you don't pass the exam, it will be very embarrassing. Not only will you be mocked, you will also have to return to the academy to train again and wait for the exam in the second half of next year. This cycle will continue until you pass the exam. Pooh, too cruel. Jingyu wanted to cry but had no tears. She held her face and said with a frown, Looks like I have to study hard this time. Otherwise, won't I be unable to leave the academy for the rest of my life? My God. Chapter 90. Yin Xiao dragged the dispirited Jingyu to put on her clothes and hurriedly pushed Jingyu out of the fu. Xing'er sat in the carriage as he drove the carriage. He stole a glance at Jingyu's expression and found that Jingyu didn't think anything was off. Only then did he slowly let out a sigh of relief. Imperial Consort, this subordinate will be here to bring you back to the fu, Xing'er said as he watched Jingyu get off the carriage and walk towards the academy. Understood. Jingyu calmly waved her hand to indicate that she understood. Only then did she walk into the academy that she had been waiting for a long time. Jingyu, you're finally here. The moment Jingyu arrived, Shangguan Linglan and Ning Shangyuan hurriedly came up to welcome her. They looked at Jingyu up and down and said, We wanted to go to the fu to see you, but we were chased out the moment we reached the fu. Ning Shangyuan looked at Jingyu with a wronged expression and said, The fu's guards are so fierce, so scary. Huh? There's such a thing? See if I don't teach those people a lesson when I get back. Jingyu was instantly enraged when she heard this. It wasn't easy for a friend to come to see her, but she was stopped and not allowed to enter. Jingyu, are you all right after you got back? You didn't get any internal injuries, right? Shangguan Linglan pulled Jing Yu's hand and asked, I'm fine. I'm full of energy. As Jing Yu spoke, she domineeringly waved her hand to indicate that she was completely fine. Jing Yu, come here, Shangguan Linglan said as he pulled Jing Yu to the side. He looked at Jing Yu with a burning gaze and said, How did you do it a few days ago in the Princess Royal's fu? I can clearly see that you don't have the strength to suppress the tiger, but why isn't the violent tiger moving? Jing Yu looked at Shangguan Linglan seriously and said, Well, it's very likely that the tiger is tired. Jing Yu, I'm not joking with you. Anger appeared in Shangguan Linglan's eyes as she stared at Jing Yu and said, Others say that Jing Lang subdued the tiger, but I can clearly see that it was you who tamed the tiger. Did you use some drug to make the beast listen to you? Ahem. You have to keep it a secret for me. Jing Yu coughed and looked at Shangguan Linglan. All right, go ahead. When Shangguan Linglan heard this, he immediately became alert. He looked around vigilantly and leaned over to Jing Yu. Actually, Shangguan Linglan blinked and looked at Jing Yu. Actually, I didn't just drink wolf's milk when I grew up. I also drank tiger's milk, so that tiger probably treated me as one of its own. Jing Yu said this smoothly and looked at Shangguan Linglan with a look that said, That's right. That's it? Shangguan Linglan was slightly stunned and looked at Jing Yu as he asked, That's it? Jing Yu nodded firmly and said, If you say it like that, it doesn't seem wrong. Shangguan Linglan frowned and fell into deep thought. Jing Yu saw that Shangguan Linglan was deep in thought and stuck out her tongue. If she didn't leave now, when would she? But I still feel that something is wrong. Where is she? Shangguan Linglan turned around and wanted to continue speaking, but he realized that Jing Yu, who was standing behind him, had already run far away. A look of helplessness flashed across his eyes. Why are you leaving so quickly? I haven't finished speaking. Shangguan Linglan hurriedly chased after her. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.